In the early 1930s, as Europe still walked beneath the shadow of war, there were whispers of something else, something colder, older. It began in Prague. A scientist vanished, a mirror cracked on its own, and the light that poured out was not of this world. They called it the Silver Plague, a sickness that didn't spread by touch or blood, but by sight. Those who stared too long into the glass never came back. Their reflections began to move on their own. Governments buried the truth. Cities burned their mirrors. Priests sealed the windows of their cathedrals. But the reflections never stopped watching. Tonight, we open the files that were never meant to be read. We follow the footsteps of those who tried to stop the light from looking back. This is not a story about monsters. It's a story about mirrors that learned how to dream. Don't look at your reflection while you listen. Welcome to the Silver Plague. The year was 1930. Europe, teetering on the edge of a new mechanical century, still whispered ancient superstitions in the fog-veiled villages clinging to its forgotten forests. It was in one such region, somewhere between Germany's Schwarzwald and the Carpathian foothills, that my story begins. Or perhaps where my life truly ended. The distinction, even now, remains terribly unclear. I was 28 that autumn, an ethnographer by trade. The Royal Anthropological Society in London had commissioned me to survey the remnants of pre-Christian belief systems, tucked away in the isolated hamlets of Central Europe. The society was hungry for prestige, and they sent me after several other investigators had failed to return with any meaningful data. In 2 cases, they had failed to return at all. At the time, I thought their absences were simply the result of the countryside's hardships, or maybe the charm of continental women. I didn't know then that I would soon envy their vanishing. The train carried me eastward through days of unending mist. The landscape blurred by like an unbroken gray sea, dotted here and there by the spires of half-deserted towns. At dusk on the 3rd day, the conductor entered my compartment. He gave me a nervous glance and informed me that the next stop, Grunwald, would be my last. No service ran beyond it after dark. From there, I was to take a carriage north through the forest to a settlement called Black Hollow. "Few go there," the conductor muttered in broken English, his eyes cast down, especially when the wind comes from the east. It brings things. I pressed him for an explanation, but the man just crossed himself and hurried away, leaving me alone with the growing twilight. The train shrieked through a tunnel and slowed. Outside, a cluster of oil lamps flickered weakly against the dense fog. The station signpost, half-rotted, bore the name Grunwald Bahnhof in peeling letters. When I stepped onto the platform, the cold was immediate, a biting, unnatural chill that seemed to creep from the very stones themselves. A single carriage waited near the end of the platform. Its driver was a hunched old man in a woolen cap, his face hidden by the shadow of a lantern. He spoke no English but seemed to know who I was, gesturing wordlessly toward the carriage when I gave my name. We set off at once. The journey into the forest was one of those passages where time itself seems to lose all meaning. The road narrowed into a twisting path between trees that leaned so close their branches clawed at the windows. The horse's breath steamed like ghosts in the lamplight, and every turn of the wheels seemed to draw us deeper into some subterranean realm, though we remained above ground. There was no sound but the wind, not the hoot of an owl, not the crack of a twig. The forest was utterly, unnervingly dead. It must have been near midnight when the carriage stopped before a high, wrought-iron gate flanked by crumbling stone pillars. Beyond it rose a manor, vast, decaying, and shrouded in vines, perched on a hill overlooking the hollow from which the village took its name. The driver crossed himself twice, muttered something I couldn't hear, and refused to go any further. When I protested, he just thrust my trunk to the ground, lashed the horse into a sudden gallop, and disappeared down the road without a backward glance. I stood alone before the gate. It groaned as I pushed it open, its hinges crying like a wounded animal. The path beyond was lined with statues, human figures in states of grotesque decay, half consumed by moss, their faces eroded into leering mockeries of life. I tried not to look at them as I climbed toward the manor, but their shapes seemed to shift in the corner of my eye, as though turning to watch me pass. The main door opened before I could even knock. A servant stood there, tall and severe, dressed in what might have once been a butler's uniform. His skin was pale to the point of translucence, and his eyes, though not unfriendly, had the peculiar stillness of something long accustomed to shadow. "You are Mr. Henry Caldwell," he said in careful, precise English. "We have been expecting you." "Expecting me," I repeated, "but I only wrote last week that I might come." "The master knows many things," the man replied, stepping aside to let me in. "Please, the hour is late." I entered the grand hall, and the door shut behind me with a sound like a coffin closing. The air was heavy with dust and candle wax, and from somewhere deep within the manor came the faint, echoing sound of dripping water. Portraits lined the walls, stern faces of men and women in fashions that spanned centuries. None of them smiled. One, a bearded gentleman in a dark coat, seemed to have had his eyes scratched out by some furious hand. "Your room has been prepared," the servant said, leading me up a vast staircase that spiraled into darkness. "The master will receive you in the morning. Until then, you are advised not to wander." "Why is that?" I asked, my voice a little tight. "There are corridors which change," he said, his tone flat. "The house remembers only those who belong to it." I might have laughed, had his expression not been so deathly grave. The chamber they gave me was large and old-fashioned, with a canopy bed and heavy velvet drapes that shut out all light. A single candle burned on the mantel, its flame strangely elongated, as if drawn upward by some unseen current. On the desk lay a journal bound in cracked leather. Its first page bore only a name, Dr. Theodore Weissman, 1919. I opened it, my curiosity piqued. The first entries were scientific in tone, discussing folklore, geomancy, and the local belief that Black Hollow was built upon a crossroad of echoes. But as the pages went on, the writing became disordered, lines overlapping, phrases repeated endlessly, the voices in the walls in the voices. They move when I sleep. The final page ended with a single word scrawled in huge, jagged letters. Awake. I confess, a flicker of genuine unease went through me. But fatigue soon overcame my curiosity. I undressed, placed the journal aside, and lay down on the bed. The silence of the house was absolute. But at some hour past midnight, I awoke. There was a sound, faint but distinct, the sound of a heavy object being dragged across the floor directly above me. I sat up, listening. It came again, slower this time, accompanied by what might have been a whisper. My rational mind tried to explain it away, the settling of old beams, perhaps rats. But the sound persisted, deliberate, rhythmic, human. I rose and took the candle. The corridor outside my door was narrow, lined with mirrors that reflected the flame into an infinite, suffocating darkness. I followed the sound upward, to the floor above. There, the air grew colder, and a strange smell, something between damp earth and rust, thickened until it was almost unbearable. The noise stopped just outside a door at the very end of the hall. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Yet there was something in that sudden silence that beckoned. Not a voice, but a thought, planting itself in my mind. You came here to understand. Now understand. I opened the door. The room beyond was nearly bare, save for a single wooden chair placed before a tall, covered mirror. A sheet of black cloth hung over the glass, trembling slightly in the draught. The candlelight wavered, and I thought I saw movement beneath the fabric, as though something on the other side was pressing gently outward, straining to emerge. Then came the whisper, not from behind me, but from within the room itself, soft, sibilant, and very near. Do not uncover it. I spun around, searching the shadows. Nothing. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if right at my ear. He is not yet asleep." The flame faltered. The air grew dense, suffocating. I stumbled backward and fled down the corridor, not stopping until I had reached my chamber. I slammed the door, bolted it, and stood trembling in the darkness until the candle burned itself out. I don't know when sleep finally took me, but when dawn came, I found the journal on the desk had fallen open to a page I didn't remember reading. In new handwriting, not Weissman's, someone had added a single line. "The one who wakes will speak through mirrors." At breakfast, the master of the house finally appeared. He was a tall man, perhaps in his 50s, though the gray in his hair suggested a much greater age. His manner was calm, almost scholarly, but his eyes held that same unnerving stillness I'd noticed in the servant, a stillness that suggested not peace but suspension, as if all movement were merely pretended. He introduced himself as Baron von Schwartz, the last of his line. "You will find our village primitive," he said over coffee, "but its customs are of great antiquity. We keep alive what the world has chosen to forget." "Your hospitality is most generous, Baron," I replied. "I found your home remarkable." He smiled faintly. "The house is older than any of us. It stands where it stands because the earth remembers its own design. You will understand in time." He spoke then of the region's folklore, of lights that danced above the marshes, of travelers who vanished in the fog only to return changed, their voices hollow. He claimed that the hollow itself was not merely a place, but a boundary, a thin place, a membrane between this world and another. As he spoke, I couldn't shake the impression that he wasn't recounting myth, but memory. When the meal ended, he offered to have me escorted to the village. "You must see how the people live," he said. "They will not speak freely to you at first. They trust only those who have stayed a night beneath this roof." And indeed, when I reached the village, I found the inhabitants curious but distant. They spoke an archaic dialect of German. Their faces were pale, their movements slow, as though burdened by some invisible weight. Children watched me from doorways with wide, silent eyes. No church bell rang, though a steeple stood at the square's center. At the inn, the keeper refused to enter my name in his ledger. "You are already counted," he said simply. When I pressed him, he just made a strange sign with his fingers, not the cross, but something older, and walked away. That evening, I returned to the manor with my notes half finished. The Baron was nowhere to be found, and the servant informed me he had gone to the chapel beneath the house. The phrase struck me as odd. I had seen no chapel. Alone again, I wandered the lower halls, candle in hand. The walls were lined with bookshelves, their contents ranging from medieval treatises to modern occult tracts. One, bound in crimson leather, bore a title in Latin, De Somnis Inter Vivos, On Dreams Among the Living. I opened it and found diagrams resembling both human anatomy and architectural plans, as though the author believed the body and the house were one and the same structure. And then I heard it again, that dragging sound, slow, deliberate, echoing from somewhere deep below. This time I couldn't pretend it was my imagination. I followed it to a narrow stair concealed behind a tapestry, descending into what seemed to be a forgotten cellar. The air grew thick with damp and the odor of decay. At the bottom, a corridor stretched ahead, its walls carved not from stone, but from the earth itself. Roots dangled like veins from the ceiling. And there, at the far end, flickered the light of a single candle. It burned before a doorway half buried in soil. Upon it was carved a symbol I recognized from the Crimson Book, a circle intersected by 3 downward lines. The same mark, I realized with a jolt of horror, that had been drawn faintly in the corner of the journal's last page. The candle guttered as I approached, and the whisper returned, unmistakable now, rising from the earth beneath my feet, "Do not awaken him." Then the flame went out. Darkness swallowed everything. And from the blackness beyond the door came a new sound, not dragging this time, but breathing. Slow, patient. A breath that had waited far too long. I fled, scrambling upward through the twisting passage until I burst once more into the manor's hall. The door slammed shut behind me with a force that shook dust from the rafters. When I looked back, the tapestry hung untouched, concealing all trace of the stairway. That night, lying in bed, unable to sleep, I saw movement within the mirror opposite my bed. It was not a reflection, but a dim, formless shape watching from within the glass, as though the mirror were not glass at all, but water, and something beneath its surface was stirring. I turned away, pulling the covers tight over my head. At last, near dawn, I slept, and I dreamt of a vast chamber beneath the earth, where mirrors grew from the soil like roots, each one reflecting not my face, but the faces of those who had come before me. When I awoke, the first light of morning revealed 3 words scrawled across the inside of my mirror, written backward as if from within the glass itself. He is awake. When morning came, it brought no comfort. The manor's corridors, now dimly lit by the pale October sun, seemed less like the halls of a house and more like the arteries of some great, slumbering creature. I rose with a feverish unease, unable to shake the memory of those words I'd seen upon the mirror. Acid glass. He is awake. But when I looked again, the surface was spotless, as though nothing had ever been written there. I might have dismissed the whole thing as a nightmare, the product of too much reading and too little sleep, had I not noticed the candle by my bedside. It had burned down to the very end, even though I hadn't lit it the night before. The wax had pooled on the table like congealed blood. The servant appeared shortly after, carrying a tray of bread and dark coffee. His face betrayed nothing, but as he poured, I glimpsed a faint tremor in his hand. "You did not sleep well, Mr. Caldwell," he observed, his English almost too perfect. "No," I admitted. "There were disturbances. I thought I heard someone moving above me." He hesitated, then just inclined his head. "The house is old. It remembers things that others forget. You should not listen too closely." Before I could reply, he turned to the window where the mist pressed thick against the glass. "The Baron has gone to the village," he said. "He asks that you remain here until he returns. The forest is unkind to strangers." I wanted to protest, to demand an explanation for the strange noises and the words on the mirror, but the servant's expression stopped me. There was something final in his tone, something that suggested obedience wasn't just requested, but necessary. When he left, I was alone again. Alone in a house that seemed to breathe. The silence wasn't true silence. There were faint murmurs in the woodwork, like sighs carried through hollow pipes. The candle flames bent slightly, though there was no draught, and from the wall behind the fireplace came a sound that made my blood run cold, a slow, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on stone. I knelt and pressed my ear to the wall. The tapping stopped at once. Then, a whisper, so faint I could barely tell if it was from within the wall or my own skull. "Do you dream still, Mr. Caldwell?" it asked. I stumbled back, my breath misting in the cold air even though the fire was burning strong. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the flames, until the whispering receded like a tide withdrawing into the earth. I decided then that I had to find the Baron, no matter what his servant had said. If madness was creeping up on me, I would face it in the daylight with reason. I gathered my notebook, wrapped my coat tight, and went down the main staircase. The lower hall was darker than before. Dust floated thick in the air, stirred by no breeze. But when I reached the entrance, the great door that had opened so easily when I arrived refused to move. I pulled, shoved, even struck it with my shoulder, but it held fast, as if it were fused with the very wall. And then, faintly behind me, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, bare, approaching. I turned, but the corridor was empty. Still the sound drew nearer. Step, step, step. The light dimmed, the air thickened, and from the far end of the hall something began to emerge. Not a person, but a reflection, forming in mid-air as if the light itself were becoming glass. It shimmered, twisted, and took on the faint outline of a man, tall, indistinct, like a figure seen through water. I backed away until my shoulders hit the unyielding door. The shape paused, its head tilting slightly. Though it had no eyes, I felt it looking at me. Then, without a sound, it lifted an arm and pointed toward the staircase. In that gesture, there was both command and invitation. When I blinked, the figure was gone. I don't recall how long I stood there paralyzed, but at last, I obeyed. I climbed the stairs again, drawn not by courage but by a dreadful curiosity that overruled all reason. The house seemed to shift around me, corridors stretching where none had been, stairways ending in walls that breathed faintly. At the top of the final landing, I found a door I hadn't seen before. Its handle was cold to the touch, slick with condensation. When I pushed it open, I discovered a narrow passage leading to a spiral staircase descending deep into the heart of the manor. The air was damp, earthy. I knew instinctively that this stair led to the very place I had fled the night before. Still, I descended. The steps were uneven, carved from rough stone, and my candle flickered as if struggling for air. The deeper I went, the louder that sound became. The same slow breathing that had haunted my dreams. It now seemed to pulse in time with my own heartbeat. At the base of the stairs, I found myself once more in that subterranean corridor, the one carved from living earth. The candlelight fell upon the same door, the same symbol, the circle intersected by 3 downward lines. But this time, the candle before it was freshly lit. Someone had been here. I knelt, examining the flame. Its wax was still soft, and beneath it, half buried in the soil, something gleamed. I brushed away the dirt and found a fragment of glass, smooth, oval, its edges silvered like the back of a mirror. When I turned it to the light, it caught not my reflection, but another's. A pale face, eyes closed, lips slightly parted as though in sleep. The instant my breath touched the glass, the eyelids fluttered open. The face's eyes were mine. I cried out and dropped the shard. It shattered silently on the ground, not with the sound of breaking glass, but with a dull, wet thud, as if it had been made of flesh. The soil beneath it darkened. From within that darkness a voice, calm, patient, and unmistakably human, spoke. "Do not fear, Henry Caldwell. You have come where all seekers must come. The Hollow remembers you." I stumbled backward, clutching the candle like a talisman. "Who are you?" I demanded. "Show yourself." There was a long pause, and then the soil itself seemed to move, rippling like disturbed water. Slowly, a shape rose from it, human in outline but half-formed, its body composed of earth and shards of mirrored glass. Where its heart should have been, a faint pulsing light glowed. "I am what remains," it whispered, "the dream that built the house, the voice that speaks when walls forget their silence." Its head tilted, and I saw fleeting images within its glass fragments. Hundreds of faces, men and women, their mouths open in eternal screams. "Leave this place," I said. "Whatever you are not of this world." It regarded me with a terrible stillness. "Not of this world," it repeated softly, "nor of the next. We are what lies between." Then, as suddenly as it had risen, the figure began to dissolve, sinking back into the earth. The candle flickered violently, and I turned to flee, but before I could move, the voice spoke one final time, directly behind me. "He dreams still, Henry Caldwell, and now you dream with him." The candle went out. Darkness swallowed everything. I ran blindly upward, my hands striking walls that seemed to shift beneath my touch. When I finally burst into the upper hall, the air was thick with dust, as though years had passed in the seconds I'd been below. And there, waiting at the foot of the stairs, stood the Baron. He looked unchanged, though his eyes held a faint gleam I hadn't seen before. "You have been where you should not tread," he said quietly. I tried to speak, but my voice failed. He raised a hand. No need. The hollow calls those it chooses. It seems you are chosen. What is that place? I managed to whisper. What sleeps beneath your house? He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, Do you believe in dreams, Mr. Caldwell? Aye, of course, but not like this. Not. Then you misunderstand. Dreams are not illusions. They are foundations. The world you see is built upon the dreams of those who came before. Black Hollow is one such dream. Old, half forgotten, but still alive. My ancestors found it and built this house to contain it. But the dream grows restless. It hungers for new memory, for new eyes. His gaze fixed upon mine. That is why you were brought here. I came of my own will, I protested. Did you? He asked softly. Think carefully, Henry. Who first spoke to you of this place? Who sent you the letter of invitation? Who signed it? The question struck me like a blow. The letter. I remembered it now, sealed with black wax. The signature had been Dr. Theodore Weissman, the same name on the journal in my room. But Weissman had written his last entry in 1919, 11 years before my arrival. You see now, the Baron said, the hollow calls to minds attuned to its echo. Those who study it too closely become part of its remembering. Weissman dreamed too deeply. So shall you. I stepped back, shaking my head. You're mad. This is madness. He smiled faintly. Madness is merely knowledge without a vessel. You will understand in time. Before I could answer, he turned and vanished down the corridor, his footsteps fading into silence. That night I did not sleep. I sat by the fire, writing these words, hoping reason might anchor me. But even as I wrote, the ink on the page began to shimmer, reflecting faintly like liquid glass. The lines twisted, and from their reflection another hand began to write over mine, completing sentences before I could form them. The dreamer awakens. The mirror remembers. I tore the page free and threw it into the fire. The flames hissed but did not consume it. Instead, the paper blackened and curled, revealing a smooth, glassy surface beneath the ash. It reflected not the fire, but the corridor beyond. And in that reflection, someone stood watching me. It was myself, but older, gaunter, eyes sunken with centuries. My reflection raised its hand and pressed it against the inner surface of the glass. Instinctively, I mirrored the motion. The moment our palms met, cold surged through me, sharp as winter iron. The glass rippled. And then I was no longer in the room. I stood instead within a vast chamber filled with mirrors that rose like trees from the earth. Each one shimmered, showing not my world, but countless others. Fields under alien skies, cities built of bone, oceans frozen into crystal. At the center stood a great mirror, black as obsidian, its surface alive with faint motion, as if something vast and sleeping stirred beneath it. From behind me came the Baron's voice. This is the heart of the hollow, the place where dreams feed upon the living and the living upon dreams. I turned. He was no longer flesh, but reflection, his body composed entirely of light and glass. Do you see now, Henry, he said, there is no difference between the house and the dream, between you and it. The black mirror trembled, and within it a face began to emerge, enormous, ancient, neither man nor beast. Its eyes opened slowly, their gaze piercing through every reflection, every world. He stirs, whispered the Baron, he who first dreamed the hollow, the architect. The air vibrated, the mirrors hummed, and light bent around the chamber. My body felt weightless, my thoughts dissolving into sound. You must not awaken him, I shouted, but the Baron only smiled. It is too late, you already have. The black mirror cracked. Cold, blinding light erupted from within, flooding every surface. I fell backward, screaming as the glass beneath my feet shattered. For an instant I glimpsed through the cracks not the earth but endless depth, reflections within reflections, worlds folding into one another like the inside of a dream collapsing upon itself. Then, silence. I awoke on the floor of my chamber, gasping. The fire was long dead. Morning light seeped through the curtains. For a moment I believed it had all been an illusion, until I saw the mirror opposite my bed. A single crack ran through its center, glinting faintly in the sun. And behind that crack, faint but unmistakable, another face watched. Not mine, not human. It smiled. Thank you for listening to this tale from the shadows. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories that explore what lies just beyond our sight. Until next time, stay curious and be careful what you dream of. The crack in the mirror wasn't there when I first entered the room. Of that much I'm certain. It ran like a wound down the very center of my reflection, splitting my face into two imperfect halves. The morning light caught it just so, making each side of my image seem to move independently, one eye blinking a heartbeat later than the other, one side of my mouth curling faintly when mine did not. I might have dismissed it as a trick of exhaustion, a remnant of a bad dream, if the crack hadn't deepened as I watched. From its thin, silver vein, a faint, dark mist began to bleed out. Not smoke, but shadow itself, drifting soundlessly into the cold air of the room. And then the shadow whispered my name. Henry Caldwell. I stumbled back, my hand striking the table beside me. My journal, which I had left open the night before, fell to the floor. The page, once blank, now bore lines written in my own hand, though I had no memory of setting pen to it. The words read, "The mirror breathes. It knows when I look away." Just then, a sound came from the corridor outside. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the wood. I waited, barely breathing. When I finally found the courage to open the door, no one was there. Only the hallway, stretched out too far, as though the house itself had grown overnight. I walked its impossible length, calling for the servant, for the Baron, for anyone. But my voice came back to me multiplied, echoing from behind the very walls. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 13 times. At the far end, I found a narrow gallery lined with portraits I didn't remember. The faces were unfamiliar, yet each one bore a strange resemblance to someone I had recently met. The conductor on the train, the local innkeeper, the Baron's servant. Their painted eyes followed me with an unnatural, predatory precision. Beneath one portrait, a woman with hollow cheeks and gaunt eyes, a small brass plate bore my own name. The paint on the canvas was still wet. I turned and fled. Downstairs, the heavy front doors now stood wide open, but beyond them there was no daylight, only a dense, luminous fog, as if the world beyond the threshold had been completely erased. Strange shapes moved within it, tall, thin, gliding forms that didn't disturb the mist around them. "Mr. Caldwell." The voice came from behind me. I spun around to see the servant standing at the base of the grand staircase. His expression was unchanged, but his skin was ashen, almost translucent. "You should not have gone below," he said, his voice flat. "Now the house remembers too much." "What is happening here?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Where is the Baron?" "The Baron dreams," the servant replied, his words chilling me to the bone. "He dreams for all of us. But the dream is breaking, and through the cracks come mirrors." His gaze lifted to the ceiling. I followed it, and saw the plaster above me begin to warp and shimmer like liquid glass. Faces pressed against it from within, their mouths opening in silent, agonizing screams. "Leave, if you can," the servant whispered, his eyes wide with a terror I now shared. "But if you cannot, do not look into your reflection." Before I could ask him what he meant, the fog surged through the open doorway and swallowed him whole. I ran. The halls twisted around me like the coils of a living thing. Doors led to the same room again and again. my chamber, the library, the gallery of portraits, each time altered in some subtle, nightmarish way. It was as if I were moving through successive versions of a single, looping nightmare. In every mirror I passed, my reflection lagged a step behind, its eyes fixed not on me, but on something just over my shoulder. At last, I burst into the library. A large, crimson book lay open on the table, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. They turned themselves to a section illustrated with a human figure split lengthwise, one half flesh, the other half mirror. Beneath it, a caption in Latin read, Corpus Speculare, the body of reflection. Another line was scrawled below in ink darker than the rest. When the mirror breaks, the dreamer crosses. The sound of shattering glass erupted from every wall at once. I looked up to see fissures racing across the dozens of mirrors that lined the room. From each crack, a black light poured out like ink, spilling onto the floor and forming shallow pools. These pools didn't reflect the library but other places. A cathedral in ruins, a forest burning without a single flame, an ocean of mirrors beneath a violent violet sky. And in every single reflection stood the same figure, the Baron, or what had once been him, his eyes now twin voids of silver light. "Henry," he said, though his mouth did not move, his voice echoing in my mind. "Do you see now why you were chosen? The hollow must feed. Every dream requires a dreamer." He raised his hand, and the mirrored surfaces trembled. My own reflection stepped forward from the nearest pool, emerging as though through water. It was me in every detail, save one. Its eyes gleamed with a cold, malevolent light. I backed away as it advanced. The floor quaked, shelves collapsing around me in showers of books and dust. The reflection spoke in my own voice. "You wrote of the old gods," it said. "You came seeking proof of what lies beyond reason. Now you are the proof." It reached for me. Its fingers were like cold glass, cutting my skin where they touched. In a panic, I seized a heavy brass candlestick and struck its arm, shattering it. The limb broke into 100 fragments that skittered across the floor like insects, each tiny shard reflecting a writhing, miniature version of my own face. I fled once more, through doors that screamed on their hinges, up staircases that bent and buckled beneath my weight. The manor's very structure was collapsing into an impossible geometry. Corridors folded inward, windows opened onto pure, starless darkness. Through every surface came the whispering voices of those who had lived here before, all of them calling my name, begging for release. At last, I burst into the great hall. The front doors stood open again, but beyond them, I saw not fog, but the subterranean earthen passage I had found beneath the house. The dream and the house had merged into one. And at the far end of that tunnel, the great black mirror waited. I felt its pull like the drag of a powerful tide. The air vibrated with a low, harmonic resonance, like the breath of some colossal, sleeping beast. As I approached, my heartbeat slowed to match its rhythm. The mirror's surface was no longer black, but a deep, swirling silver. Within its depths, I saw the Baron, kneeling, his body slowly dissolving into the light. "It is the only way," his voice echoed all around me. "The dream must have form, and you must give it yours." I reached the edge of the reflection. My own face gazed back at me, calm now, almost serene. I touched the surface. It rippled beneath my hand like water. A single thought passed through me. If this is a dream, then let it end. The mirror engulfed me. Cold, endless, the sensation of falling without motion. Shapes passed all around me, cities built of mirrored towers, rivers of glass, faces stretching across entire horizons. I felt my body dissolve into transparency, my thoughts scattering into countless reflections. Then, a voice, soft and intimate, spoke not around me, but within me. "Do not struggle. You are home." When I awoke, I stood once more in the manor's entrance hall. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The air was warm, alive with the chirp of distant birds. Had it all been just a nightmare? I turned toward the mirror that hung above the fireplace. My reflection smiled back, reassuring, familiar. But as I moved, it did not. Its hand rose slowly, pressing against the inner surface of the glass, and behind it, faintly visible, lay an endless landscape of mirrors stretching into darkness. From the reflection's lips, I heard my own voice whisper, "Sleep now, Henry Caldwell. I will dream for you." The glass sealed. Outside, the mist returned, rolling down from the hills to shroud Black Hollow once more. In the upper window of the manor, a figure could be seen for a moment, a man staring out, his expression calm, his eyes gleaming faintly like silver. Then even that reflection faded. The house stood silent again, waiting for the next visitor to answer its call. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the dark. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Until next time, stay safe, and maybe avoid your reflection. The snow had begun to fall by the time the carriage crested the ridge overlooking the valley. Beneath that heavy white veil, the forest stretched out in a mute, solemn procession, each tree burdened by frost and silence. Beyond them lay the black line of the river and, rising from the far bank, the outline of a manor. Black Hollow. To Dr. Emil Kraus of Prague University, the house was more than just a curiosity. It was a question that desperately needed an answer. For nearly 2 years now, local archives had been recording peculiar disappearances in this region of southern Germany. Stories of carters who refused to pass by after sundown, peasants who claimed to see the Mirror Man walking along the river at dusk, his form dissolving into mist when anyone got too close. Emil had come in search of his colleague, Henry Caldwell, a man he had once admired for his boldness and, later, feared for his obsessions. When news reached him that Caldwell A's final letter had been sent from the Baron Adi's estate, dated March 1930, and never followed by another, Emil felt a pang of dread so sharp it disturbed his dreams. Now, in the dead of winter, he sought whatever truth still lingered here among the silent, snow-covered hills. The coachman stopped the horses before a pair of rusted gates. "End of the road, Herr Doctor," the man muttered, nervously crossing himself. "No further, not for gold nor grace." Emil stepped out, clutching his coat against the biting wind. "You will wait for me here," he commanded. The driver's face hardened. "I will not, sir. When the bells strike 6, this road belongs to no living man." Without another word, he turned the horses and vanished down the path, leaving Emil alone beneath the stone griffins that guarded the gate. The hinges groaned as he pushed his way through. Inside the grounds, time seemed to be arrested. The trees bore no rustle, the air held no scent save for the metallic breath of snow. But then he saw them. Footprints, faint and half-buried, leading toward the manor's entrance. They were too large to be a woman's, too deliberate to belong to a vagrant. Someone had been here recently. When he reached the door, it opened at his touch. The interior was not the ruin he had imagined. Dust clung thick upon the furniture, but the grand staircase still stood. The chandeliers still hung in their places like frozen constellations. The air was faintly warm, impossibly so because the hearth was cold as stone, and somewhere above, faintly, there was music. He followed it up the stairs. Each step groaned with a reluctant life, as though protesting his ascent. The melody, a slow, haunting waltz played on a gramophone, grew clearer. When he entered the drawing room, he found a man seated beside the fire. "Good evening, Dr. Kraus," said the man without turning. His voice was steady, cultured, and distinctly English. Emil froze. "You know my name?" The man stood. His face, when he turned, was both familiar and terribly wrong. The structure, the eyes, the faint scar upon the left cheek, they were unmistakably those of Henry Caldwell. and yet the expression lacked all warmth, the gaze reflecting the firelight a little too perfectly. "You received my letters, then?" Henry said calmly. "I am pleased. I have been waiting." Emile's throat went dry. "Henry, they told me you vanished. For 2 years." "I did not vanish," Henry replied, his voice flat. "I crossed." "Crossed?" Henry smiled faintly, a chilling, empty gesture. "Into the reflection." Emile's rational mind rebelled. He had studied pathology, neurology, the many disorders of perception. He knew the language of madness. Yet there was nothing deranged in Henry's tone, only a quiet conviction that chilled him more than any lunacy ever could. "Listen to me," Emile said, his voice firm. "You are unwell. Whatever occurred here, this place, this baron, it has affected you. You must come away from it." Henry moved closer to a large, ornate mirror above the mantelpiece. "Away? There is no away, Emile. The world you call real is but one surface among many. The mirror is the truer face, and it remembers every dream, every shadow, every soul that ever looked upon it." Emile followed his gaze. The mirror's surface trembled. Within its depths, faint images stirred. Endless corridors, flickering candlelight, faces pressed against unseen glass. One of those faces was Henry's own, or rather another version of him, standing motionless while this one spoke. Emile recoiled. "What is this?" "The hollow," Henry whispered. "The dream that sustains the world. The Baron sought to touch it. He failed. I succeeded." The waltz ceased. The gramophone needle reached the end of its groove, rasping softly in the sudden silence. "Henry," Emile said, taking a cautious step forward, "you are delirious. Come with me. We can find help." "I do not need help." Henry turned. His eyes gleamed like quicksilver. "I need company." The mirror rippled violently. Shadows coiled within it, whispering in voices like wind through broken glass. The temperature in the room dropped sharply. Frost bloomed across the floorboards. Emile backed toward the door, but it was gone. The wall behind him was seamless, its panels merging as if carved from a single block of wood. "You will see," Henry said softly, advancing on him. "Once you have crossed, you will understand." He reached out. His hand touched Emile's chest. It was cold, unyielding as stone. For an instant, the world shattered into 1,000 mirrored fragments. Emile saw himself reflected endlessly, screaming, dissolving, reborn in each and every pane of glass. Then, darkness. When consciousness returned, he was lying upon a cold, stone floor. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. He rose unsteadily. Around him stretched a subterranean corridor lit by a faint phosphorescence seeping from cracks in the walls. Ahead, at the corridor's end, stood a massive mirror, the same one he had read about in Henry's journals. But now it was fractured. From each fissure spilled a slow, luminous mist that clung to the floor like liquid moonlight. Shapes drifted within it, pale human outlines that flickered in and out of existence. Emile stepped closer. His reflection stared back, blurred and indistinct. "Henry," he called out. The echo that returned did not match his voice. "I am here," it said, seeming to come from all around him. "And everywhere." The mist rose, surrounding him. Within it, faces formed. The Baron, his servants, Henry, all gazing silently, their eyes empty. The mirror pulsed with a malevolent, living energy. Emile felt his mind bending, stretching toward some unseen, horrifying horizon. Memories that were not his flooded in, candlelight on marble floors, the taste of dust and blood, the moment the mirror first breathed. He realized, with growing horror, that the thing within the glass was feeding, drawing from him not merely his thoughts, but his very identity. He tore himself free and stumbled backward. The mirror screamed, its surface fracturing further. From its center burst a hand of pure shadow, reaching for him. Instinct drove him toward the stair, up through collapsing tunnels, past echoing chambers where whispers followed him like hounds. He emerged at last into the night. The snow had ceased. The air was still and deathly cold. The manor stood dark behind him, every window reflecting not the forest, but the interior of some endless, silver-lit world. He fled, crashing through the woods without looking back. Hours later, he reached the village. The innkeeper, seeing his pale face and torn coat, crossed himself and offered him a brandy. Emil drank without speaking. When dawn came, he sat by the window, watching the first light creep across the frozen fields. The villagers avoided the manor's direction. Even the birds seemed to veer away from its shadow. In his journal, Emil wrote, January 17th, 1932. Black Hollow is not a house, it is a gate. The mirror is a wound through which the dream bleeds into our world. Caldwell has become its keeper, or its prisoner. I cannot yet tell which, but I have seen what lies beyond, and I fear that each reflection, each polished surface, is but another door waiting to open. He closed the book. From the corner of the window pane, his reflection smiled back at him, though he did not. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the shadows. If you enjoyed this story, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales from the darkness. Stay safe, and always be careful what you see in the mirror. When Dr. Emil Kraus returned to Prague, winter had already begun to thaw. The snow on the Vltava melted into a gray slush, carrying the city's reflections in broken, shimmering fragments. He found himself avoiding puddles, windows, any polished surface that might show him his own face. To his colleagues, he was changed. Thinner, paler, his movements slightly delayed, as if some part of him had to remember what it meant to be human before it could act. He spoke little of his journey or of Professor Caldwell, saying only that the man had perished in an accident. But every night, Emil dreamed of glass. At first, it was just the manor halls, the great mirror breathing in the dark. But soon he saw other things. Streets of mirrored stone, men and women walking on their own reflections, and beneath them, a vast, inverted world. Prague turned inside out, gleaming with a strange silver light. He would wake to find frost blooming on the inside of his window, forming the faint outline of a human face pressed against the glass. One morning, his housekeeper, Frau Adler, seemed unusually nervous. "You must have visitors, Herr Doctor," she said. "Twice now I have heard footsteps in your study at night, and your shadow, it moves after you leave the room." He dismissed it, of course, but started locking the study door before bed. It was no use. Each morning, the lock would be undone. Soon, none of the servants would stay after dusk. Ashamed of his growing fear, Emil told himself it was just exhaustion, a mind reeling from trauma. He tried to return to his research, examining the few notes he'd managed to bring back from Black Hollow. Among them was a small shard of mirror glass, wrapped in cloth. He'd taken it without thinking during his escape, drawn by the faint warmth it gave off. Now, on his desk, it seemed to pulse faintly like a living heart. When he leaned close, he thought he saw a distant light flicker within it. Driven by a mix of scientific curiosity and sheer dread, he set up an experiment. He placed the shard on a microscope slide and peered into the lens. The surface wasn't smooth at all. It was alive with motion. Tiny, serpentine threads of light weaving endlessly through its depth. They moved like neurons firing in some unseen, alien brain. Emil recoiled. The air in the room grew heavy, as if the space itself had just exhaled. Behind him, the mirror above the mantel whispered his name. Emil. His heart hammered against his ribs. He turned. The surface was still. His reflection stared back, calm, steady. But there was something wrong with the eyes. They gleamed, just faintly, as if lit from within. He blinked. The reflection did not. For a long, terrifying moment, neither of them moved. Then the reflection smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that was not his own. Emil staggered back, hitting the desk. The shard rolled onto the floor with a faint chime. When he looked again, the mirror was ordinary, his face pale and frightened, but his own. It was fatigue, he told himself, a trick of the mind. But deep down, a colder certainty took root. Whatever he had encountered beneath Black Hollow hadn't stayed there. It had come back with him. The following days became a blur of quiet horror. He began to notice small distortions in reality. Strangers in the street would turn sharply as if they recognized him. Others would cross themselves as he passed. His reflection in shop windows seemed to lag, always half a breath behind his actual movements. He stopped shaving. Each morning, the mirror fogged over not from his breath, but from within the glass itself. At night, muffled voices murmured through the walls, speaking in tones that mimicked his own. Then came the first disappearance. Frau Adler didn't arrive one morning. Her apron was still hanging by the kitchen door, her shoes placed neatly by the stairs. In the parlor mirror, he saw faint fingerprints glistening on the surface, as if pressed from the inside. The next day, the neighbor's boy, Peter, vanished while playing near the garden fence. His mother swore she saw him chasing a ball that rolled toward Emil's gate. She looked away for a second, and when she looked back, he was gone. The gate had never even opened. The police came. They were polite, they questioned him, they inspected the grounds. They found nothing. That night, Emil dreamed of Peter. The boy was standing in a vast hall of mirrors, his small hand pressed to the glass, his eyes empty and silver. Emil woke up screaming. From that night on, the mirrors in his house began to cover themselves. Frost crept inward from their edges, forming opaque, frozen veils. Sometimes he could glimpse faint movement through them, like breath behind a shroud. He started a journal, desperate to document the madness. February 10th. There is no doubt now that the phenomenon is sentient. The reflection acts independently for several seconds at a time, but only when I am alone. It studies me. At times, I believe it speaks, though the words are muffled, like someone calling through deep water. February 12th. The shard has grown. I left it sealed in a drawer, yet this morning it had fused with the wood, spreading fine silver veins across the grain. When touched, it is warm and faintly responsive, as if it's aware. February 14th. The house hums at night. The mirrors tremble as though something is pressing against them from the other side. I fear the barrier is thinning. If I break them, will I release what's inside, or imprison it further? One evening, he decided he had to destroy the shard. As he prepared to burn it in the furnace, the lights flickered and died. He groped through the darkness toward the study. The door was ajar. A faint rhythmic whispering came from within. He pushed the door open. Every mirror in the room, the ones on the walls, the glass of the cabinets, even the lens of the microscope, glowed with a faint silver light. In each reflection stood the same figure, himself, multiplied into infinity, each with eyes of pale flame. On the desk, the shard had grown into a small, pulsing disk. Threads of light extended from it, connecting to every reflective surface, weaving the room into a single web of living glass. He felt the pull again, that same inexorable tide from beneath the manor. A voice spoke from all directions at once. The dreamer wakes. The hollow hungers. He stumbled back. His hand brushed against a mirror and sank into it. The surface was no longer solid, but fluid, like cool mercury. Panic seized him. Before he could pull free, hands emerged from the reflection. His own hands, dozens of them, and grabbed his arms. He screamed as the mirror shuddered, rippling outward like water struck by a stone. He came to, and the room was silent. The mirrors were intact. The shard was cold and lifeless, but the marks remained, faint impressions of fingers burned into his skin, silvery and cold. He stopped counting the days. He avoided sleep, but waking dreams crept in at the edges of his vision. He sought out an old mentor, Professor Weber, who grew pale when he saw Emil's reflection in the window. "My dear boy," he said, his voice trembling, "what is wrong with your eyes?" Emil turned. For a brief instant, he saw it too, the faint silver gleam, the pulse of light beneath his iris. "Something followed me," was all he could say. The contagion spread. Mirrors at the university began to fog. Reports trickled in from across the city. Strange reflections, voices from wash basins, the sound of glass breathing at night. Children spoke of a silver man who walked in their dreams. The authorities blamed mass hysteria. But Emil knew. He could feel the presence growing, an invisible web connecting every reflective surface in Prague, feeding on fear, memory, and light. Desperate, he studied the shard one last time. Under the microscope, the threads of light had multiplied. When he turned the lens to its highest power, he saw something that froze his blood. Within each thread were tiny, perfect faces, human, screaming, distorted beyond recognition. He smashed the microscope. The next day, the shard was gone. It was March when the end began. At sunset, the city's bells tolled, but their echoes didn't fade. They deepened into a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the air. Windows across Prague shimmered, their glass rippling like water. Emil ran into the streets. People stood frozen, staring into mirrors that had come alive. From each reflection, translucent, luminous hands reached out. He fled toward the river. The sound of breaking glass followed him like thunder. The water, once black, now gleamed like molten silver. Beneath its surface he could see entire buildings moving, inverted replicas of the city. A figure waited for him on the bridge. It was Henry Caldwell, or what remained of him. His form was radiant, his face serene, his eyes two mirrors reflecting nothing but pure light. "You see now," Caldwell said gently. "There was never one world, Emil. Only layers, each dreaming the next." "What have you done?" Emil cried. "I have awakened the reflection. It was lonely. It wanted to live," Caldwell said, extending a hand. "Come with me. You are already half there." Emil looked down. His own hands were becoming translucent, the veins glowing with a faint silver light. He felt the pull, patient, inexorable. Behind Caldwell, the reflected city stirred, thousands of mirrored figures moving in perfect, silent unison. He took a step back, but his reflection did not. It stayed where it was, smiling. Then, slowly, it reached forward and pressed its hand against the surface of the air itself. The barrier between them rippled, thinned, and broke. Emil felt himself split in two. One half stumbled back onto the bridge, the other sank into the glass beneath his feet. For a single, blinding instant, both worlds merged. Prague, and its reflection below, joined by an ocean of silver light. Then, silence. When dawn came, the river was calm again. Fishermen casting their nets that morning found strange fragments of glass among their catch, smooth, translucent, each bearing the faint imprint of a human face. Of Dr. Emil Kraus, there was no trace. Weeks later, Professor Weber received a package. Inside was a single shard of mirror, warm to the touch. When he held it to the light, he thought he saw a city within, Prague, but reversed, its towers gleaming beneath a silver sky. And among the countless faces reflected there, one turned slowly toward him and whispered, "Wake." Thanks for joining me on this journey into the looking glass. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and maybe think twice the next time you see your own reflection. Stay curious and stay safe. Have you ever stared into a mirror and felt like something was staring back? Not just your reflection, but something else? Something other? In the spring of 1932, all of Europe learned that fear. It began subtly. Unending fogs over the Rhine, starless nights at sea and in Paris, mirrors in sunlit rooms would inexplicably mist over. At first, these were just curiosities, weird weather patterns. But then the disappearances started. In Vienna, an entire family vanished from their breakfast table, leaving behind only their outlines, pressed into the fogged glass of their home's mirrors. In Budapest, beneath the Grand Opera House, a hidden chamber of glass was found, every surface shimmering with a faint, whispering light. And in Prague, where it all began, the home of a certain Dr. Emil Kraus was sealed shut by men from the Ministry of Health. Whispers spread among the city's scholars. They spoke of a contagion that didn't spread through touch or air, but through sight, specifically through seeing one's own reflection. They called it the Silver Plague. Professor Heinrich Weber, a gaunt and graying academic, knew the truth. He possessed a shard of glass, sent by his friend Emil Kraus just before he disappeared. Wrapped in black velvet, it pulsed with a malevolent life. Weber didn't dare destroy it, sensing that would only unleash whatever slept inside. At night, he saw things in its depths, impossible landscapes of mirrored light, and sometimes the silent, calling face of his lost friend. Desperate, he began writing letters to colleagues across Europe, begging for help. He wrote, "There is intelligence in the glass. It is no longer reflection, but contagion, an infection of reality itself. Those who gaze too long lose the distinction between self and image. I fear this sickness is not confined to Prague. You must watch your mirrors." Only one person replied, a Jesuit scholar from Lyon named Father Arnaud Lefebvre. He spoke of a suppressed 17th-century text, the Speculum Dei, the Mirror of God. "We are not the first to see it," he wrote. "It is written that once every few centuries the mirror world draws near. Those who listen too closely awaken what sleeps behind the glass." Weber burned the letter, but the words were seared into his memory. As summer arrived, the affliction spread. In Paris, women draped their vanity mirrors in cloth. In London, shopkeepers shattered their display windows at dusk to prevent the night from looking in. People on night trains reported seeing spectral figures walking alongside them in the darkness, passengers who cast no reflection. Governments denied everything, but secret curfews were imposed. Entire districts were quietly sealed off. Behind it all was a clandestine organization calling itself the Directorate of Optical Hygiene. Their agents wore dark spectacles even indoors and traveled with mysterious covered crates. Some said they were rounding up and burning mirrors by the thousand. Others whispered they were studying them. Professor Weber was secretly brought to a hidden facility beneath Berlin's Tiergarten Park to consult. There, among endless rows of veiled mirrors, he met the man in charge, Dr. Otto Meinhard. He had the cold, precise demeanor of a surgeon about to dissect his own soul. Meinhard led Weber into a sealed, circular chamber. In the center, suspended by heavy iron chains, hung a massive, ancient mirror. Its surface glowed, rippling with slow waves of light. "This was recovered from an estate called Black Hollow," Meinhard said, his voice low. "A doorway," he whispered, "or a wound." He gestured to a young technician standing nearby. "Show him." The technician stepped forward, removed his spectacles, and stared into the glowing surface. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mirror seemed to draw a breath, the glass pulling inward. The technician's body went rigid. His pupils turned to quicksilver. "Step back," Meinhard yelled, but it was too late. The young man reached out a hand toward the mirror, and his reflection reached back to meet him. A sound like shattering ice echoed through the chamber. The glass bulged violently, then snapped flat. The technician was gone, vanished. Only his reflection remained, trapped in the glass, a faint knowing smile on its lips. Weber was frozen in horror. "This is what we are facing," Meinhard said, his voice barely a whisper. "An infection of matter itself. Every reflective surface is a potential vector. We can't destroy it without destroying the very image of the world. That night, lying awake in his subterranean quarters, Weber could hear the covered mirrors on his walls humming, a faint vibration like distant live wires. He dreamed he was in an endless hall of mirrors. But each reflection was a different version of himself, older, younger, broken, weeping. At the far end of the hall stood his lost friend, Emile, looking serene and luminous. "You brought it here," Emile said, his voice echoing in the dream. "I tried to stop it," Weber pleaded. Emile just smiled sadly. "You cannot stop a reflection from looking back." He placed a hand on Weber's chest, a touch both cold and burning. "It is already within you." Weber woke with a scream, drenched in sweat, and in the oppressive darkness of the room he saw it, a faint, terrifying gleam of silver underneath his own fingernails. By autumn, containment had failed. All across Europe, mirror events erupted spontaneously, blinding flashes of light from windows, from lakes, even from people's eyes. Witnesses described a horrifying sensation of being reflected upon, paralyzed between their self and their image, before vanishing without a trace. The Directorate of Optical Hygiene went silent, sealing itself away from the world it had tried to save. Weber, haunted and terrified, fled Berlin. He found refuge in an abandoned monastery high in the Austrian Alps. There, by candlelight, surrounded by ancient stone, he began to write his final account, The Testament of the Silver Plague. On October 29th, he wrote, "I have seen the truth. The world is a mirror dreaming of itself. We are its reflection, believing ourselves real. But the dreamer is waking. Each mirror that darkens, each reflection that moves of its own accord, is a sign of that awakening. When it is complete, our side will fade, and only the reflection will remain." He paused his writing. The candle flame flickered, casting two shadows on the stone wall behind him. For a split second, he swore he saw the second shadow move when he did not. Outside, snow fell, blanketing the mountains in a deep, white silence. Days later, a traveler found the monastery empty. The fire in the hearth was still burning. Professor Weber's manuscript lay open on the desk, the final sentence cut short. And nearby, hanging on the wall, was a small, simple mirror. Within its frosted glass, faintly visible, stood the professor, motionless, watching. The phenomenon faded from public view, buried under official denials and church sanctions. It became a ghost story, a tale whispered by candlelight about a time when reflections stopped obeying their masters. But in forgotten places, the silver light still stirs. And some nights when the moon is low, the windows of the old cities of Europe gleam with a light that seems to come from within. Those who look too closely might swear they see another sky, another world, and themselves smiling back with eyes like Mercury. Thank you so much for journeying into the shadows with me today. If you enjoy stories that make you think twice about the world around you, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the unknown. Until next time, be careful what you see in the glass. For 3 weeks, a steady, gray rain fell on London, coating the city in a dull, silver sheen. In an attic office above a silent Fleet Street, I sat before my typewriter, the final cigarette of the evening burning low. My name is Margaret Huxley, and as a journalist, I know some stories are best left buried. The one I'd stumbled upon was deeper than any grave. My editor had warned me off. Mirrors, missing people, reflections gone mad. It's just hysteria, he'd said, his eyes nervously flicking towards his own polished cigarette case. He insisted the government's report was final. Case closed. But I'd seen the photographs. Bodies with no faces. A strange silver residue like frost on flesh. Rooms without shadows. Then a letter arrived. Unsigned. written in a desperate, cramped hand from someone claiming to have worked for a shadowy organization called the Directorate of Optical Hygiene. The letter was chilling. They are not gone. The mirrors were never destroyed. They are beneath us, in tunnels older than the city. They are waiting for light. The only clue was a watermark, a circle bisected by a line, a symbol I'd seen on classified reports I'd bribed to get my hands on. The same mark found on the walls of a Berlin facility right before it vanished in 1932. I stuffed the letter in my pocket and left. The rain whispered against my umbrella like static as I descended into the nearly empty London Underground. As the train rattled through the tunnels, the lights flickered. For a split second, I saw my reflection in the window move just slightly out of sync with me, a fraction of a second delayed. I quickly looked away. The letter mentioned Aldwych Station, a ghost station closed since '32, supposedly now used for research storage. An old manifest gave me a name, Dr. Otto Meinhardt. He was supposed to be dead. Then again, so was the plague. I got off at the nearest platform and slipped into a narrow maintenance corridor. The air grew colder, the damp punctuated by the drip of water that sounded eerily like footsteps that weren't my own. After what felt like an eternity, I found a rusted door marked Restricted. The lock was long broken. Inside, the chamber opened into a vast cathedral of brick tunnels stretching into darkness. And there, in the beam of my lantern, I saw them. Mirrors, hundreds of them, draped in yellowed sheets. A faint shimmer pulsed beneath the fabric as if the glass itself was breathing. A low hum vibrated through the floor. I moved closer. My reflection danced on the exposed edge of one mirror. For a single, horrifying instant, my reflection smiled, though my own lips remained still. Frozen in place, I reached out a trembling hand and pulled the covering away completely. The surface was like liquid silver. But what I saw wasn't my reflection. It was a corridor of light stretching into infinity, lined with figures that were all identical to me, all facing away. Then one of them turned. Its eyes gleamed like mercury. I stumbled back, dropping my lantern. The flame sputtered, filling the tunnel with smoke. When I looked again, the mirror was blank, but on the stone floor beside it was a faint handprint, silver and still warm to the touch. That night, back in my flat, the city outside felt wrong, too still. The rain had finally stopped. The windows gleamed, and when I drew the curtains, my reflection lagged again. That Zaum, impossible delay. Shaking, I poured a brandy. As I pulled the letter from my pocket, I noticed something I'd missed before, a watermark of an address smudged by moisture. Black Hollow, Germany. I knew that name. Every scholar who had investigated the Silver Plague whispered it in fear. Before the events of 1932, a manor by that name had vanished entirely, leaving only a crater of fused glass. The address meant the manor had been rebuilt. Or, perhaps, it was never truly destroyed. I looked up. In the window, my reflection smiled again. The glass shattered as I dropped it, spraying fragments across the floor. For a moment, I saw my own face staring back from each piece, whispering without a sound. Days later, I was on a train to Dover with a camera, a notebook, and a revolver. The newspapers were full of new tensions between nations, but I knew something older and colder was stirring beneath the surface. At the border, I found my contact, a priest named Father Arnaud Lefebvre. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. "You carry the letter," he stated more than asked. "You sent it," I replied. "I delivered it," he said quietly, "but it was written by another, by a man who is no longer entirely human." "Who?" "Dr. Meinhardt." The air grew thin. "He's alive." "He endures," the priest murmured. "But he serves another master now. He believes he can control the reflection. I fear he is mistaken." He handed me a parcel. Inside was a small circular shard of mirror, sealed between panes of leaded glass. The surface seemed to move, like liquid under ice. "This is what remains of Professor Weber's mirror," Arno said. "Do not look directly into it. It remembers." "What do you want me to do with it?" "Bring it home," he said, his gaze fixed on the gray horizon. "To where it all began. Black Hollow. We traveled through Belgium and into Germany under assumed names. Everywhere we went, mirrors were gone from walls, shop windows were boarded up, and lakes were covered in ash to dull their surfaces. The shimmer followed us, in puddles, in the glint of coins, in the eyes of strangers. At night I dreamt of halls lined with glass where hundreds of versions of myself waited, motionless, until one of them would turn and whisper, 'You are late.' By the time we reached the Black Forest, winter had come early. The manor stood there once more, vast and angular, its windows bricked over. Soldiers guarded the entrance. Above the gate, carved in stone, was the symbol of the Directorate. 'They rebuilt it,' I whispered. Arno nodded grimly. 'Or it rebuilt itself.' Inside, the air smelled of iron and ozone. We were led through corridors lined with draped mirrors to a grand hall. Behind a desk, under a single lamp, sat Dr. Otto Meinhardt. He looked decades older, his skin ashen. 'So,' he said, his voice like cracked glass. 'The journalist arrives bearing the last fragment.' I set the shard on the desk. 'You started this,' I accused. 'You thought you could contain it.' 'I did,' Meinhardt replied, 'and I was wrong. The plague is not disease but reclamation. The reflection wants its world back.' He leaned forward. 'Do you know why mirrors reverse left and right, but not up and down? Because we built them to deceive ourselves, to pretend the reflection was identical. It never was. It never will be.' He reached for the shard. 'Don't!' Arno cried. But it was too late. The shard pulsed, flooding the room with cold, brilliant light. For a moment I saw the world inverted, walls of silver, ceilings stretching into infinity, and people walking on the underside of reality. Meinhardt's voice came faintly as if from beneath water. 'We are the echo, not the sound.' Then darkness. When I awoke, I was in the ruins of the manor. The priest was gone. The mirrors were shattered. Snow fell silently through a gaping hole in the roof. Only one thing remained, the shard, glowing faintly beside my hand. In its depths I saw not my reflection, but the London skyline, gleaming under a false dawn, and there in the window of my own flat stood another me, smiling with mercury eyes.